New York Department of Environmental Protection's Jamaica Bay Oyster Restoration Pilot Project has partnered with the Billion Oyster Project, Cornell Cooperative Extension Marine Program, HDR Engineering, Inc., New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and the Hudson River Foundation. The ultimate goal of this project is to create oyster reefs to help improve water quality, create habitat, and educate the public. In no way is this project designed to create a food source. The oysters will not be used for eating.
This project started after Hurricane Sandy, and the Department of the Interior released funds that are managed by NIFWIF, which is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and they released funds that the New York City Department of Environmental Protection pursued to do this research here in Jamaica Bay. We came on as subs, the New York Harbor Foundation, and also the Hudson River Foundation, Cornell Cooperative Extension, and HDR Engineering. And so that team altogether is cooperating on different tasks that are involved with restoring oysters here in Jamaica Bay.
Back in 2010, we worked with the city to build 2 pilot-scale reefs in Queens and Brooklyn. And as a result of those positive results, we scaled it up with the help of federal and New York City money. So my role has been from the planning stages, and I'm primarily working with oyster health. I'm bringing samples and helping to look at things like condition index, how the oysters are doing, have they spawned, do they have any diseases. I'm working with a crew to deploy and pick up the spat collectors every month during the season.
The vision is that if you have a large breeding population of adult oysters and available substrate nearby, that the oysters reproduce, there's a possibility that the larvae will end up on the bed of substrate below. The first thing we're going to try to figure out is whether or not the oysters spawn, and then we can get an idea of how many oyster larvae we're adding to the bed.
And of course, these oysters are not for human consumption, and there are patrols, and it's close to the airport. That was one of the reasons we did it here, is we have the watchful eye of the Port Authority and the police at the airport to watch over these adult oysters especially that we put down. We're building 4 receiver reefs, largely out of surf clam shell with a veneer of oyster, surf clam, and in some cases crushed porcelain from toilets from New York City schools that were replaced with low flow versions.
The goal will be between the clam shell and the porcelain toilets and then oyster shell to see which one the larvae like to attach to most, because in the end it's really just a big experiment. Because if we're going to build hundreds of acres of reefs, we need to figure out what the best substrate. If we can use old recycled toilets as well as old clam shells, then that's going to be a big help.
We also have 30 stations around the bay, mostly to the west of this site, because we're pretty far to the east. We put down pipe collectors to look for baby oysters, as well as 4 receiver reefs near the long line.
So it's supposed to be sort of a natural bottom, so not a smooth, flat layer of shell. So it'll have some peaks and valleys and be spread out over the area, but the goal is to have it all fit in that 500 square meter rectangle. And we're going to send divers down later today to see how well we did.
Well, Harbor School is a New York City public high school that I started. Now I run the Harbor Foundation. We fund harbor school programs and we oversee the Billion Oyster Project. But all of it is kind of one, which is the idea of getting young people engaged in marine restoration. But the goal of the Billion Oyster Project generally is that we get more youth engaged in the marine environment, and by doing that work they fall in love with it, so that we have thousands more Gregg Rivaras and more Pete Malinowskis and more people from Ken's Marine and more people in New York City who went to public school in New York City but had a chance to fall in love with the marine environment and as a result can obtain jobs in it. I think what's interesting to note is that Billion Oyster Project, we want to plant 1 billion oysters over the next 20 years. We've done 20 million so far. But this today gives you a sense of actually what it takes in terms of number of people and scale. And if you think oyster restoration, you picture a couple of people putting some oysters down. Right. But this is the scale that is going to be necessary, the sort of level of human intervention that we think is necessary to jumpstart the oyster population in this region so that it can begin to sustain itself. And that's the goal, is that we have enough oysters that then they're starting to grow naturally here. Water quality is good enough adults in the system, and enough substrate on the bottom.
It represents a big investment by the city in oyster restoration, which is something that we've been pushing for and hoping for a long time. So I think that's significant. It's pretty exciting. I mean, there's a lot of work went into getting to this point, and this is certainly a dramatic event. It's very visually dramatic. There's big barges putting lots of material on the bottom. So it's really exciting.
When I think about the benefits of oyster reef restoration, the habitat is a primary. The filtration is amazing, and having these large numbers of adult oysters going into the nursery will be hopefully something that we can measure the impact of with Ray Grizzle, our scientist from New Hampshire. But in addition to the habitat and the filtration, we also hope that we'll be putting larvae out into the water, and that those larvae will grow. We'll be able to find them on our spat collectors, and that they'll start new populations of oysters in Jamaica Bay.
But it's great coverage starting right across, so I'm happy. This is a good shot. It's a good omen.
Right.
Nice first start. Yes. Nice first start.
For a summary of results, here is Jim Lodge of the Hudson River Foundation.
The receiver reefs provide important new habitat for resident and transient macrofauna. Diver observations indicate provision of habitat for a diverse community of estuarine marine species. Plankton tows were conducted weekly from late July through September in 2018, and the samples were analyzed for oyster DNA presence. Plankton monitoring results provide solid evidence that the oysters in the donor reef were producing larvae, and that these larvae were surviving until late reproductive stages.